All right, we'll reconvene this meeting of the Job Growth, Energy, Affordability, Finance, and Policy Committee. For those that don't know, the spreadsheet for the House File 843, as well as the delete all amendment for House File 843, the Omnibus bill, they're both online at the House Committee, the committee homepage and the House of Representatives website. In addition, I believe there's still some paper copies. If not, we can work on getting more paper copies for people. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to start with Ms. Hendricks. And before we begin, I just want to say thank you so much to, as always, both the nonpartisan and partisan staff for all the work they put in the last couple of weeks. I believe this is version 18 of the spreadsheet, if I remember right. And so a lot of hours, a lot of work put in, and I just want to make sure that we all say thank you to the staff for all their work. We really do appreciate it. So, Ms. Hendricks, we'll start with you. You can do a brief overview of the spreadsheet, and then we'll move on to Ms. Newman.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, what I'll do is I'll give an overview of the first page of the spreadsheet, as it has summarizes all the change items by agency as well as by fund. And then members can go through pages 2 through page 11 to see all of the individual change items under all the agencies. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. So starting on line 41, the net general fund impact, we see, first of all, the February forecast base number for fiscal year 16 and 17 at $351,493,000. This committee was given a target of $330,900,000. So that meant a reduction in general fund spending or increase in revenue of $20,593,000. The way that the committee reached this target in the bill is through a number of reductions under Department of Employment, Economic Development on line 2, about a 16.6 million reduction for the biennium. Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, a little over 10.5 million reduction from the base. Department of Labor and Industry, about $1 million increase. Explore Minnesota Tourism, a 2.8 million increase on line 5 of the spreadsheet. And then a reduction in the Bureau of Mediation Services of $900,000. Department of Commerce, an increase in their general fund spending of 7.9 million, almost $8 million. PUC, a reduction of $1.452 million. So that brings the total general fund spending, or the direct appropriations, I should say, by all these agencies to, for the biennium, to $323 million, $145,000. So that's a reduction of $17.7 million. There were no changes made in any of the statutory appropriations from the general fund. There were changes in general fund revenue, and all those items are listed starting on line 29 for the items that are in the bill, going through to line 38. That brings us to 39, a total general fund revenue change of $2.86 million for the biennium. So the change in the increase in revenue and the decrease in direct appropriations from the general fund brings us to the committee's target of $20,593,000. Listed below from lines 46 to 53 are direct appropriation totals by fund. So that is across all agencies. So that is the kind of high-level summary of the spreadsheet and all of the appropriations in the bill. Then starting on page 2 and all the way down, there's a lot of detail for every single agency. It lists the agency's individual programs, so the riders that are in the bill, as well as all the change items that have been made both in the, in this bill, in the House bill, as well as the governor's proposal. And again, all of those added totals. So I won't be going through every single line, as we will probably be here tomorrow morning if I do that. But I just wanted to point out that all the way at the end on page 11, there's a summary of non-general fund revenue changes by agency.
Thank you. Ms. Newman, if you want to begin doing a brief overview of some of the policy in the bill?
Mr. Chair and members, I'll begin with Article 2, which deals with jobs and economic development. That begins on page 32 of the bill. There are a number of items in here. There are some clarifications related to the Greater Minnesota Business Development Public Infrastructure Grant Programs. There is workforce housing, the Greater Minnesota Business Expansion Program. There's some clarifying language. There are job training grants, both direct to businesses and financing to MNSCU institutions for customized training for skilled manufacturing. There is a expansion of the use for the dislocated worker fund to include incumbent worker training, the program accountability and uniform outcome report card. The scope of what is covered under that is expanded, as are the information requirements that grantees must comply with in order to continue to get grants. There is some clarifying language related to the St. Paul Port Authority, and there is provision for study of long-term care workforce needs in that article.
Chair and Representatives, Article 3 is the housing policy article that starts on page 52. The first section amends Chapter 327 related to manufactured homes, related to vehicles parked near manufactured homes. The second section on page 54 amends the Economic Development and Housing Challenge Fund so that the appropriations are divided equally between the 7-county metro area and Greater Minnesota. Sections 3 through 6 amend Chapter 469, which is related to tax increment financing. And this creates sections that allow for workforce housing to be built using tax increment financing. Sections 7 through 9, starting on page 59, requires legislative approval for portions of the Met Council's development guide related to housing, and requires legislative approval of the Met Council's new life cycle housing goals and funding.
Thank you. Mr. Weeks, did you want to? Okay, Ms. Newman.
Mr. Chair and members, Article 4, dealing with labor and industry, begins on page 61 of the bill. And again, I'm just going to give you a sort of a high-level overview of what's in there. There is language for the Department of Labor and Industry to continue to work on developing competency standards for dual training. There is language dealing with how the assigned risk excess surplus would be used for safety grants. There's some additional language related to assigned risk plan transfers that have occurred previously. There are licensing and fee reductions in the construction codes area in Dolly, as well as fee reductions dealing with mixed martial arts. There are some modifications to the energy code for some of the performance-based compliance, and there is language related to the 6-year cycle for adoption of the code. And then Mr. Weeks is going to talk to you about the minimum wage.
Mr. Weeks.
There is also a 2-tiered minimum wage provision for tipped employees. Oh, I'm sorry, that begins on page 63, line 15. That provision also deletes the special minimum wage for certain resort employees working under J non-immigrant visas. That's on page 64, line 11. In addition, beginning on page 66, line 21 rather, there's a prohibition of the deduction of credit card swipe fees from employee tips. The section following that, section 5, page 66, line 29, is a provision prohibiting local units of government from requiring a minimum wage different from the statewide minimum wage. Section 6 following that prohibits local units of government requiring private employers to provide certain employee benefits. And that's it.
Is that everything? Where's she at? Oh, there you go.
Chair and Representatives, page 76, Article 5, in Section 1, there is a transfer of funds from the automobile theft prevention account to the insurance fraud prevention account. Section 2 allows the Commissioner of Commerce to impose an administrative penalty of up to $20,000 for insurance fraud. Section 3 provides a supplemental penalty to insurance fraud imposed by the Commissioner of Commerce. Section 4 is again the insurance fraud prevention account transfer. Section 5 is the Minvest registration exemption. And that allows Minnesota businesses to solicit Minnesota investors through a website without registering for the sale of the investments as securities with the Minnesota Department of Commerce. And Section 6 defines Voice over Internet Protocol Service, or VoIP. Section 7 defines Internet Protocol-enabled service, or IP-enabled service. Section 8 prohibits the regulation of VoIP or IP-enabled service, except as expressly allowed in that section. And Section 9, again, is the Insurance Fraud Prevention Account transfer. Sections 10 and 11 deal with unclaimed property, and they modify the commissioner's duties as well as how public notice has to be given. Section 12 prohibits the solicitation of accident victims pursuant to the insurance fraud abilities of the commissioner. Section 13 provides for the hiring of a vendor by the Commissioner of Commerce to facilitate returning unclaimed property to its owners. Section 14 requires reports from the Commissioner of Commerce to the legislature regarding the unclaimed property division. And Section 15 is the repeal of the gold bullion dealers regulation.
The next article is Article 6, which deals with unemployment insurance and begins on page 95. The vast majority of sections in this article are housekeeping proposals from the Unemployment Insurance Advisory Council. They're stylistic and housekeeping changes, with two exceptions. Section 6 of the article is an unemployment insurance tax reduction. In effect, this provision puts a cap on the UI trust fund and returns any money over that cap to UI taxpayers in the form of credits to offset future tax obligations. And Section 17, which begins on page 105, line 7, is an additional one-time unemployment insurance tax reduction, which operates in the same way as Section 6, but is a one-time only. On December 31st, 2015, requires $200 million of money in the unemployment insurance trust fund to be returned to taxpayers in the forms of tax credits to offset future obligations.
Mr. Elo.
Articles 7 through 12 contain the changes made to energy statutes in the bill. Article 7 deals with delivered fuels, with propane mostly. Section 5 exempting propane tanks from sales tax through the end of 2017. Article 8, beginning on page 107, deals with energy conservation. The first four articles revolve around the sunset of the Conservation Improvement Program at the end of 2016. Section 5 on the bottom of page 109 creates a number of new programs providing rebates for technologies such as energy storage, solar thermal, wind, and geothermal heat pumps. Section 7 on page 111 creates a task force to look at the future of delivery of conservation services in Minnesota. Article 9, beginning on page 112, deals with renewable fuels. Section 2 creates a new Energy Fund account, which is in some ways the old Renewable Development Fund account. And that's the fund that will contain payments from Xcel Energy each year for casks stored at Prairie Island and Monticello. Page 115 lists 7 programs that are in this bill that are funded through this new energy fund, and the rest of that section deletes the old language from the Renewable Development Fund pertaining to grant programs, which is what it had been used for. On page 117, there's changes made to the net metering program. The most notable probably that in the future, beginning as of the effective date of this act, facilities will receive compensation based on the avoided cost of the utility rather than the retail rate, as they have in the past. Page 120 renames the renewable energy standards the advanced energy standards and makes some changes to those programs, most notably allowing, looking on page 124 now, the changes made to subdivision 2F, the solar energy standard. The new language retains the 1.5% increase in the standard that must be met by 2020, but allows that to be met by any eligible energy technology. It eliminates the energy goal of the state that by 2030, 10% of the state's of retail sales in Minnesota be generated by solar energy. Beginning on page 128 are changes made to the Made in Minnesota program, essentially stopping that program as of, again, the effective date of the act. Payments that have been, will be continue to be made for 10 years to people who have already applied to that program, but none starting after the effective date of this program. Section 9 on page 129 is a new program that's funded from that energy fund account that is an incentive for solar, small solar under 10 kW installations. Beginning on page 130, setback for solar energy generating systems, Representative Swedzinski's bill. And a number of repealers are listed beginning on page 134 under section 17. Also at the bottom of that page is Article 10, greenhouse gas emissions, which makes a number of the changes that we've seen brought in bills before the committee this session. Section 2 on page 135 changes the quantitative goals for greenhouse gas emissions reductions to the level that's proposed in the state's clean energy plan that we discussed earlier. Section 4 on page 135 essentially, I'll refer to this maybe in shorthand as the North Dakota fix. It deletes language regarding prohibitions of new imports or commitments to import electricity from outside the state, and also entering into new long-term contracts that would increase greenhouse gas emissions. At the bottom of page 137 is requirement that the plan that the PCA sends to the Environmental Protection Agency regarding clean power be approved by the legislature. Article 11 is a miscellaneous article that begins on page 138. On page 144 are electric vehicle rebates, much as we saw in House File 2081 last night. On page 145 is language that refers to the recovery of natural gas extension projects, Representative O'Neill's bill, I believe. Section 10 is Representative Ansell's bill, beginning on page 147. That was heard in committee. Section 11 is the repeal of the nuclear power moratorium on page 148, which also begins the article on compressed natural gas vehicle rebates that we heard yesterday. And Article 12 is just a list of conforming changes that changes the language to conform with the changes made earlier in the bill.
Well, all those in favor signify by, just kidding, no. Questions from members of the committee before we move to member comment? Or move to public comment? Representative Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you want me to ask all my questions about what the bill does right now?
Well, Representative Hortman, I know that there may be reasons why you want to ask questions now as opposed to later, and we're also going to take public comment, so I guess I'm,
Saying maybe sprinkle them in.
yeah, but I mean, I don't, so go ahead. I mean, it's up to you, I guess is what I'm saying.
All right. Well, one thing, Mr. Chair, there's a property tax section in the energy portion of the bill, and I was wondering if you could explain, I believe it's section 14.
Of Article,
Let me find it.
I believe the
I think it's
section
on
you're
page
looking at
150.
is 150. I believe, without looking at it, I believe what that is the exclusion of wind production taxes from levy limits.
Can you explain what that does and what the impact is?
So what happens is, right now, there are no levy limits, but in the event there are levy limits, there are exclusions to levy limits in current law. So for example, payments to retirement trust funds are excluded, or urgent public safety measures. In addition, there are certain property tax revenues that are excluded from the calculation of levy limits. And this would, because the jurisdictions that are high in wind concentration have had large, in some cases, production revenue, it kind of skews the results of it. So this is a Representative Torkelson bill, is my recollection. Representative Hortman.
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering why it's in this bill and not in the tax bill.
Representative Hortman, there's a couple of tax provisions in the bill that you'll see in here. It'll be up to, obviously, the chair of the tax committee, which of those provisions will be contained in this bill and which ones will be contained in his. So this is kind of, I practice the Phyllis Kahn strategy of legislating, which is you take your language and you put it in as many bills as possible. But again, this bill will need to go through taxes, and if the chair decides he will allow it to pass out of there, then it will. If he decides it won't, then it won't. But you'll also notice there's a Fabian tax increment financing provision for workforce housing. It's in there as well. So, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the property tax provision that we were just talking about, is there any general fund impact, and is that carried on this spreadsheet?
Representative Hortman, there should be no general fund impact. If there was a general fund impact, it would be carried in the tax committee.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I also noticed that you have some provisions that affect the state government finance bill and the environment finance division, and I'm wondering, does the bill go through the environment finance division and the state government finance division as well?
Can you point me to the page and line numbers you're referring to?
Well, you're having the Department of Administration study conservation after you eliminate all the last 30 years of conservation legislation, and you're having a $75,000 appropriation out of the state government finance budget to pay for that study?
Representative Hortman, that is funded from the Energy Fund. It's not funded under the state government finance appropriation. And with regards to the SIP program, I've communicated this exhaustively to people, but I'll take another crack at it now because this is the largest audience I can make this speech, and maybe I won't have to deliver it another 100 times. It is clear by any objective assessment that the SIP program saves money and reduces pollution. It is also undeniably true that there are ways that we can do this program better so that we will reduce additional pollution and provide additional savings. The evidence of that is the fact that there were over 11 bills submitted this session to reform the SIP law. And the facts as they exist when when these laws were created over 20 years ago, those facts have changed. Candidly, the area of technology, wireless integration, the ubiquitous nature of wireless being available, the advances in combined heat and power, these are all things which we can be providing increased energy savings, reduced pollution, and save people a ton of money. And rather than doing a plug-in or an ad hoc approach to it, the intent of this chair is to get the best and the brightest together and to do a SIP 2.0 program, which is simply going to reduce pollution, increase energy savings, and save people money. And I am confident that the adults in the industry in the conservation industry and the utility industry can rise to that level of task, that they can get this done. It'll be the first thing we take care of next session. I am not interested in another task force that puts a report or a book out that sits up on someone else's shelf. I am very confident that we can deliver those results. And I understand that this is change, and I understand that change is hard, but the reality is we can do better, and I am supremely confident that we can achieve those goals of increased energy savings, reduced pollution, and saving people a ton of money. So that's, there's been some talk out there about I want to delete the SIP program, or the majority wants to delete the SIP program. This is a mechanism to get the best and the brightest in the room, to improve the program, to make it better. Anyone who believes that the SIP program should be allowed to expire and should go away, they're just wrong. They're going to be at the fringes of this debate, and they're going to marginalize themselves. The reality is reforming this plan is going to bring stakeholders together in one room, and those who this is a way to get people at the table. If they don't show up, then the best and the brightest are going to rewrite this. So that's my intent, Representative Hortman. I can't make it any more. Before we released the bill, I made that my intent. I communicated it to stakeholders. I understand why there's why people worry about change, but change is a good thing. So Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the fact that you repeal all the existing sections of law as of 12/31/2016 pertaining to energy conservation is what might create the impression that you intend to end any energy conservation programs. It's kind of like saying you're going to sunset law enforcement on 12/31/2016 and put a study together to see if whether we need it after that date and if we can improve upon it. But in the meantime, we're just going to delete all existing appropriations for law enforcement. So, I mean, you're saying one thing, the bill is doing something quite different.
Well, again, Representative Hortman, there are, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but just to be clear, there are 19 months until that expiration date, and all I can say as clear as I can, I do not want this program to go away. I want a SIP 2.0 plan passed. But I will tell you that having an ad hoc nature where people add paragraphs or sections to the existing law and lobby legislators is not the best way to deliver the best product for Minnesotans. I think if we have a stakeholder process like this, it will get those people to the table, and I'm 100% confident that we're going to have a better SIP law than we have now. But I understand that that takes a little bit of trust in me. I get that. I understand there's concern about that, but I'll just tell people candidly, as I've said privately, at the end of the day, if this bill is enacted, and somehow the SIP program expired at the end of next year, it would be a complete and utter failure on my part. My word would be mud, it would be nothing, and I would have no credibility on any future legislative issues. I don't want that. I want this to be an improved program that saves people money. I think we can do better. Representative Hortman.
Mr. Chair, I understood that right now you wanted me to just ask questions.
Yeah,
We can have a policy argument here now, or we could save it for the floor.
Okay, well, I know that there are unique circumstances where you may want to be.
Ask a few questions.
Right, I understand that. So I don't know if you wanted that today or not, because I don't know if people know, so.
Mr. Chair, if I could just take a minute and look through the bill and then ask some questions as the testimony is going forward?
You betcha.
That would be helpful.
Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Representative Isaacson.
Thank you, Chair. And maybe I missed it because I was reading. Did you structure how this was going to work? Are we going to do energy and then jobs, or just go from the beginning of the bill to the end of the bill? Are we taking questions just randomly from members, or are we going to start with the House or the comments from public, just so I have an idea of what to expect and pay attention to the right spots?
Well, hopefully you pay attention to everybody, Representative Isaacson. But for Representative Hortman, just okay. So I wanted to make sure that she has comments and questions. If people have questions about the technical nature of the bill, I kind of started letting that get into a debate, which I did a bad job of. I shouldn't have done that. But my intent is just to make sure people understand the contents of the bill, where we answer questions of staff right now, and then we'll move to public testimony. At that point, there's not going to be questioning of public testimony. It's more for us to listen and learn the feedback of the bill. We'll save the debate for when we mark up the bill at some point in the future.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you. Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and along the same lines as Representative Isaacson had, I like to think of myself as a slow learner, so I have to read your bill, kind of absorb it, and the jobs piece, having just come out 55 minutes ago, it's a little tough. So hopefully tomorrow or Friday or Saturday or maybe even Monday, when we have questions on the thinking behind the bill or the policy in the bill, so that we fully understand exactly what you were trying to do. I'm sure you'll be happy to answer those questions at that time. I've looked through the jobs and I've got a couple of questions, but I think I'm going to try to read it a second or third time before I start asking questions.
Understood. Representative Mahoney, of course, when we mark up the bill, that's a standard process to ask questions about sections as well. So, Representative Hortman.
Mr. Chair, then I have just two questions before we go forward. And the problem I'm having here is matching the page numbers of the bill that you posted online and the page numbers of the bill you just handed me. But the provision where you're creating, you're eliminating the solar energy standard, the 1.5% that we created in 2013 of retail energy sales that needed to be met by solar energy. So you're deleting that standard and making it something that can be met by any available energy source. Is that right?
No. If you look at, Mr. Eloff, what article are we in on this? Article,
Page 124.
thank you. Page 124, we'll go through each of the changes that are made to the SES. First things first is, wait. Okay, is first of all, we, the carve-out for the Iron Range, what I call the cloquet carve-out is deleted in statute, so everyone's playing by the same rules in the IOU territories. Second of all is the goal, the 10% goal is stricken from that area that's listed under the RES. On 124.33, when it lists that the requirement established in paragraph A may be met through the use of solar energy or any other more affordable eligible energy technology, the eligible energy technologies are actually listed on page 120. So it would not be, natural gas or coal could not meet that standard. It would have to be carbon-free energy to meet that standard, but only if it was more affordable. Representative Hortman.
Representative Garofalo, then what that means is it would not have to be met by solar energy. Is that right?
That is correct.
So you've eliminated the 1.5% solar energy standard.
No, because.
If wind energy
Part-
can meet the 1.5%, then it's not really a solar energy standard.
Representative Hortman, in order for wind or hydroelectricity or biomass to meet this, it would have to be equally as clean as solar, but also cheaper. So it doesn't eliminate it, it just says that if there's an alternative to be just as clean but cheaper, then they have the flexibility of doing that. They don't have to do it. They can choose solar, but ultimately, if there are cheaper ways to produce clean energy, we want to allow our utilities that option. Representative Hortman.
Mr. Chair, you do understand that if solar energy were cheaper than wind, then we wouldn't need a solar energy standard. And the reason we need a solar energy standard is to drive the market. And it is exactly this type of policy making that drove the market for wind, which now makes it the cheapest power added on the system. But that was not the case before the 1994 deal resolving the Prairie Island nuclear waste storage matter and providing the incentive payments. And that was not the case before the 2007 renewable energy standard, not objective standard, which drove the price of wind down to the point where it is now the most affordable. And so by saying that the solar energy standard can be met by wind, you're saying there is no solar energy standard. And in fact, you don't want to incentivize the solar industry to get to the point of efficiency that the wind industry got to because of the policy interventions that were made by the state of Minnesota.
Well, Representative Hortman, there have been substantial reductions in the price of solar in the last 5 to 10 years, but I don't think that the state of Minnesota is going to drive worldwide policy on solar pricing. I think that the factors that are playing into that are far beyond the state of Minnesota. But I would, again, point out to you that on line 124, line 33, the word is may. They don't have to do it. If they choose to stick with solar programs, if, for example, as you know, solar may cost more in some situations, but it's replacing higher cost energy. Likewise, wind energy may be more affordable than solar, but it may be replacing more affordable energy. And so that's the flexibility we want to give our utilities. The goal is not to social engineer energy policy. The goal is to have cleaner and cheaper energy. And that's the intent of that language is.
Mr. Chair, I think that what you've tried to do in the bill is create a fig leaf, but I can see through the fig leaf. And what you're doing is you're eliminating the solar energy standard. I want to ask about the new incentive that you're creating, because I'm not clear how that works. It looks like in the, so when you cancel the Prairie Island nuclear waste storage deal from 1994 and you rescind that and you create the energy fund account, then you create a new incentive payment for solar energy installations of 10 kilowatt and smaller. How does that work? What's the amount of the incentive payment?
Representative Hortman, a couple of things. First of all, we're not canceling the Prairie Island agreement. The dry cask storage fees that Xcel was paying in the past remains the same. The Office of the Legislative Auditor submitted a report on the RDF and said it was in need of reform. I mean, this is an unprecedented account where we mandate a private sector business put money into a fund outside the state's control in a private account, and then the legislature directs these private funds how to be spent. So the $175 million that were directed in solar incentives last session were actually done on private money in a private account. And in 2011, under a different majority, the goal was to strip out the mandates, kind of let the policy experts, let the scientists determine how the RDF was going to be used. And that lasted about 6 months. In 2013, the legislature went back in and basically spent almost all the money. So the purpose of this is not to get rid of the dry cask storage. They're still paying it. It's to bring it in-house so that now everybody has access to these funds for their purposes instead of a few people who know how to use the RDF grant process. With regards to the amount of the solar incentive plan, as well as the small-scale wind, solar thermal, geothermal, and energy storage incentives, the biennial investment in that is $45 million.
Mr. Chair, I was just wondering, how does it work? So I'm reading Section 9 on page 27 of the draft that you released earlier, which I think must be about page 129-ish of the new draft. And there's some incentive that gets paid to people who install a 10 kilowatt or smaller system, and I don't know how you calculate the incentive. Who gets paid what?
Representative Horton, the intent is that there would be a production incentive for rooftop solar.
And
Senator
how much per kilowatt hour or per panel, or is there any way to calculate what that actually means to consumers?
Representative Hortman, on 130.8, and Mr. Eloff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's where we basically allow the commissioner for this small-scale wind, solar thermal, geothermal, and energy storage, we task the Commerce Department to develop those incentive programs to what they feel would be an appropriate level. Right now, we've kind of left it vanilla. We want to be responsive to what factors should be included in calculating that, but that's the intent of the legislation. Certainly, we can work on that. Representative Hortman.
So, Mr. Chair, if a person wanted to calculate how much they were eligible to receive under your solar incentive program, is there any guidance in the bill for what the amount would be?
Representative Hortman, it would be calculated basically the same way the Made in Minnesota solar program was, where once the Department of Commerce delivered a rate schedule, that's when they would find out. Representative Hortman.
And so, Mr. Chair, then the appropriation is, there's no specific amount allocated to solar incentives?
The Distributed Generation Incentive Fund program takes rooftop solar, solar thermal, small-scale wind, energy storage, and geothermal, and puts them into the same fund that they are funded from. That fund is $45 million over the biennium. There are not specific amounts mandated or floors for each of the 5 technologies. Representative Hortman.
Mr. Chair, my read then on the bill is what you're essentially doing by converting the Renewable Development Fund from an Xcel owned and controlled fund to a $12.5 million tax on energy, because when you put it into the state's control, there's no difference between that and a tax. You're just taking the $7.5 million that they pay on the Prairie Island casks and the $5 million that they pay on the Monticello casks, and you're putting that in the general fund. So you're essentially raising taxes on energy customers by $12.5 million and just putting it in the state budget. There's nothing in the bill that would prevent us from taking that $12.5 million and spending it on nursing homes later, or kindergarten, or transportation.
Well, Representative Hortman, no legislature can bind a future legislature to decisions. So just like when the Renewable Development Fund was walled off and we were going to let the scientists and the researchers do it, and then the next session people came back and used it for solar incentives, there's nothing that prohibits future legislatures from spending any general fund money or any renewable development fund money on whatever they want. That was one of the criticisms of the Office of the Legislative Auditor. But you did bring up the fact of the formerly known as RDF payments going into this fund. I should point out that on the spreadsheet, where's the $7 million for the energy fund on the spreadsheet? There's a $7 million general fund appropriation that's going into the energy fund as well. So it's not just Xcel ratepayers that are paying it. There's general fund money in that bowl as well. Representative Hartman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I believe it is a $12.5 million tax increase on energy customers in the state, because it is a special fund, but we know what Governor Palenti did when the $4.5 billion deficit showed up in 2003. He found every special fund that there was. He took the money out and he put it in the general fund. So there's Excel ratepayers who are currently footing the bill for this $12.5 million. Right now, it's in the Renewable Development Fund. It can only be spent on renewable development projects or things that we as the legislature direct it to be spent on that are in the renewable energy field. If we were to move it into the state's pot, there's nothing to prevent a future legislature from spending it on whatever they want, which basically converts it to tax revenue.
And Representative Portman, do you view the Excelsior Energy coal-fired power plant in northern Minnesota as renewable energy?
Mr. Chair, I think not.
And are you aware that the legislature and the governor signed a law taking the money from the Renewable Development Fund to pay for that in previous sessions? Representative Portman?
Mr. Chair, at least it's in the energy field, and the purpose of the Prairie Island Nuclear Agreement in 1994 was to invest in energy sources that would make it less likely that we would need to build additional nuclear plants and store more nuclear waste in Minnesota. So the purpose of the Renewable Development Fund is to look at alternatives to nuclear energy. And in that respect, it fits the bill. But there's no guarantee that in the future, that $12.5 million would be spent that way.
The Representative Hartman, there's no guarantee under current law. People, I mean, any legislature can go into the Renewable Development Fund and appropriate the money. The only difference is
Like
what...
kindergarten, or nursing homes, or transportation?
Representative Hartman, the legislature could have done that last session. It's a private sector fund that is directed by the state control. So whether it's under the RDF in a private sector account, or whether it's in the energy fund in the legislature, it really doesn't matter. The legislature can spend the money, as members of both parties have done. My point is that by bringing it in publicly, now everybody has a chance to compete for these dollars, not just a few groups. And so that's the intent of it. But Representative Portman, you mentioned $12.5 million. What is that number that you're mentioning? Where's that coming from?
My understanding is that annually, and somebody in Excel can just nod if I'm right or wrong, I thought I saw somewhere in the bill and on the spreadsheets that it's $500,000 per cask at Prairie Island, and that's a total of $7.5 million from Prairie Island, and it's $350,000. Okay, it's higher per cask at Monticello, and that's $5 million at Monticello.
I think the annual amount is about $27 to $30 million they're paying in dry cask storage fees, which I'm seeing that
You should probably get them down and just answer it.
maybe not, well, because we're going to do public testimony eventually here, but so it's about 27. The point is that the assessments Excel ratepayers are paying for dry cask storage. The only way they're going to go up is if there's more dry casks. There's no policy changes to make ratepayers pay more. So I just want to make that clear.
So,
Representative
Mr.
Portman.
Chair, your tax increase is much larger than I initially thought.
Well, it's not a tax increase, Representative Hartman. They're paying the same amount as under current law, but on that we'll disagree. Representative
Let's
Hartman.
move on to your cut in transit funding. It was on section 15, page 50 of the bill that you posted on Monday, and so I'm going to guess it's maybe 140, 150 of the current bill. And that's where you exempt electricity bills from the CTIB tax. And I'm wondering if you know the annual impact of that, and if that's carried in the transportation budget or in the tax bill, or how is that accounted for?
Sure. Well, the SIDTIB program, for people who don't know, is not state funds. It's a county board that 5 counties currently level the sales tax. What this would do is it would exempt just that transit portion of the sales tax in the 5-county metro area on electric bills and on gas bills. My understanding is the revenue note on that is $6.2 million a year. That would be a direct reduction in energy bills for metro area ratepayers, and would be $6 million reduction in the money going into CTIP. Representative Hartman.
So, Mr. Chair, given the way that that's structured, does it need to be carried on anybody's spreadsheet?
Representative Hartman, I do not, I mean, it'll be accounted for in a spreadsheet, but in terms of the general fund targets, it doesn't need to. I mean, it will show up, and there's an all funds document that'll list all financial changes, but in terms of the standard fiscal controls we have in the House with the budget resolution and general fund targets, it's not general fund revenue, it's not a general fund expense, so no.
So,
Representative
Mr. Chair, it cuts transit funding by $6.2 million, but it's not carried on anybody's spreadsheet because it's not in anybody's target, right?
It's not going to be counted in the general fund spreadsheet, but it would be in tracking sheets that are non-general fund, just like Workforce Development Fund, Job Skills Partnership Board, and other non-general fund revenue sources. Representative Hartman.
And I know you and I will have much longer conversation about the policy in the bill on the House floor. I'll just wrap it up for now because I know we want to get to testimony, but I just want to ask you is if you retain section 17 on page 52 of the bill that you posted, It's probably like 154 of the, where you're transferring the administration of the community action programs from community action entities to some other organizations. The advisory task force.
Mr. Eloff.
Mr. Chair, that's on page 153.
Representative Hortman, are you referring to the study that's on 153, section 17?
Right. Mr. Chair, what I was wondering is, was that a bill that we heard?
Representative Hortman, no.
Okay, Mr. Chair, it seems to me that the problem with the community action situation was a lack of oversight. Is there anything in this language that changes the way that the oversight works?
Representative Hortman, I think the intent of this was to make sure that we didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The Community Action Councils provide a very valuable service. As you may know, Representative Albright had a bill to transfer the oversight of that from one agency to another. It was not well received by stakeholders nor legislators, and so I think that's a conversation that'll continue going on forward. Representative Hartman.
Mr. Chair, I think those are all my pure questions, and then my commentary will, and our arguments will save for another day.
Thank you, Representative Hartman. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee before we move to public testimony? Representative Lunan.
I have a question on my portion of this, back on page, I believe it's 10. There were some numbers that got changed. We asked for, I'm sorry, on page 10, I believe it is, all I had asked for was a change of appropriation, and some of the other numbers got changed. On line 1014, as it was prior to this, was in Greater Minnesota, businesses with less than 250 employees, and in the metro area, 150 employees. And for some reason, I don't know why that number went to 100.
So, Representative Lunan, you're referring to the grant for the Minnesota High Tech Association and
Correct.
SciTech. Okay, and so there's a discrepancy in language between your
Yep,
intent.
correct.
Okay, so if you could work with staff on that and get an amendment drafted, we can
Okay,
take a look
thank
at it.
you.
But obviously, with this many pages of awesomeness, there's going to be some technical errors, so.
That's as far as I read.
Yeah, so we'll, just make a note of that, but again, we'll work with staff on the amendment for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from Representative Isaacson?
Mr. Chair, on the 41st page of awesomeness, there is a section referencing the customized training for skilled manufacturing industries, and I'm wondering if that reflects House File 551, or where you guys, what that's from.
Representative Isaacson, I do not have the House files memorized. I'm going to look to phone a friend, Ms. Newman. Can you, the language that Representative Isaacson pointed to?
Mr. Chair and Representative Isaacson, I believe that's from House File 1426 as it was amended in this committee.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure. I was a little unclear, because, so then, Mr. Chair,
Representative Isaacson.
is House File 551 then represented by the section referring to dual competencies, dual training competencies that we're funding?
Ms. Newman.
Mr. Chair and Representative Isaacson, House File 551, the portion of that that is in here is the Dolly development of competency standards.
There we go.
The grants through deed are not in the bill.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
And then where in the bill, and Representative Isaacson, I think the language you may be looking for is, also is on page 13.
I saw
Okay,
that.
okay,
Yep, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee before we move to public testimony? All right, first up, we have, and I apologize for screwing up the name, Abdi Dihai and Lors King from, no? Yes? Oh, is it Lewis King? Okay, I'm sorry. So Abdi, D-E-H-I. It's the last name? No? Okay, we'll go to Beth Frazier then. You're next on the list. Oh. Oh, okay. Okay, so Mr. King, we'll go to you second, then we'll go to Ms. Frazier, and then you'll be next. My apologies. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Beth Fraser with the Commission of Deaf, Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing Minnesotans. And I don't have a paper copy of the bill, but I saw what I needed to on my iPad, and just want to thank you so much for appropriating $1 million per year for employment supports for deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing workers. This will make a real difference for adults and youth, like Cynthia Benson, who you might remember, who testified before you in committee, who through a program got a job at Macy's and was learning real job skills. And for private employers like Carrie Scanlon from GEM Technology, who is in Representative Smith's district. I don't know if he's here. But who also came before you and talked about having deaf workers and having people teach them how to communicate better. This will help deaf workers gain job skills, obtain jobs, and keep them, saving the state and federal government money. It will keep people employed who would otherwise be on disability. It's a great investment of state funds. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. King, Lewis King. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'm Lewis King, President and CEO of Summit Academy, OIC.
Good evening, committee chair, committee members. My name is Joe Hobart, President and CEO of American Indian OIC.
Please continue.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to appear before committee. We've had a long-standing partnership with this committee and members. We appreciate support that we've received from you, and it's been a good time to be in the training business. As you know, we have a full economy now. We're putting people to work across the board. We've switched a little bit in our focus, expanding beyond the OICs now to form the Emerging Workforce Coalition. We met with some members this morning to help address the looming demographic shift and keeping our economy strong by taking people off the bench, if you will, and putting them into the workforce. We look forward to the opportunity to work with you on these challenges. We see opportunities in them. We have close to 49,000 people that we have to find in the next 5 years, because by the year 2020, as you know, the growth in our workforce will be virtually zero. And we will find that in communities of color and from immigrants who have come to this state looking for a way of life. They enjoy the warm winters, and they want to help keep the economy strong. So that is the OICs are expanding to include organizations who have not typically been in our network.
I'd like to second Mr. King's remarks and include from the perspective of the American Indian community that while we have some rather remarkable numbers regarding employment factors here in the state of Minnesota for the American Indian community, the numbers don't ring true in that manner. We still have an exorbitantly high unemployment rate and an exorbitantly high rate of folks that are not a part of the workforce. And it's our job as community-based organizations to provide ourselves as an asset for the state, to continue our connection to these communities, to provide the training and the employment placement that they're in desperate need of.
Thank you. And if you could, you state your name for the record.
Sure. My name is Joe Hobart, President and CEO of American Indian OIC.
Thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Unless you had anything else, so.
No, sir.
Bruce Snyder, you're next. And Sarah Erickson, you're on deck.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity of speaking with you tonight. I've practiced medicine in Minnesota for over 43 years, and I'm here tonight as a member of the Twin Cities Medical Society, a society of over 4,500 physicians and medical students. And today we presented an open letter to the legislators, and hopefully this was distributed or that you will get it soon. I have copies. And I'd like to read this brief letter to the committee. The Twin Cities Medical Society member physicians strive to make Minnesotans the healthiest in the nation. We work with community organizations, the Minnesota Department of Health, and other leaders and regulatory bodies to assist policymakers in making wise decisions when considering issues pertaining to public health. The Twin Cities Medical Society recognizes that air and water pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from coal-fired power plants are adversely affecting our environment and impacting the health of Minnesota's communities. Among the many health consequences of our reliance on fossil fuels are worsening asthma and allergic disorders, greater risk of developmental disorders, more frequent exacerbations of chronic heart and lung disease, higher rates of infections, such as Lyme disease. Mercury, ozone, and acidic pollutants from coal-fired generating plants are also endangering the quality of our air and fresh water. With this in mind, the Twin Cities Medical Society urges Minnesota's legislators to support measures to maintain, preserve, and extend the 2007 Next Generation Energy Act, which committed Minnesota to transitioning to clean, renewable energy. This law has helped our state develop a healthy, jobs-growing green energy economy and is reducing dangerous polluting emissions from fossil fuel combustion. Additionally, we urge legislators to support progressive increases in Minnesota's renewable energy and energy efficiency standards and other measures to help make Minnesota fossil-free. The Twin Cities Medical Society is concerned that legislation currently under consideration appears to counter the important environmental gains passed by previous legislatures and signed by governors of both parties. We were also concerned about apparent weakening of protection for Minnesota's water quality by inserting legislative oversight over the important work of our very expert state agencies, the Minnesota Environmental Protection Agency and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. In closing, Twin Cities Medical Society physician members urge our leaders to devote their efforts towards strengthening the important protections needed for our environment and our health. We must put the well-being of our communities, and especially our children, before all other concerns.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder, I read online about your letter, but I haven't received the letter yet. Can I get a copy of it from the page?
I'd be delighted.
And Mr. Snyder, I was actually a little bit confused when I heard about the press conference because I actually went to nonpartisan staff and I said, did we put something in this bill that I didn't intend to put in this bill? Because this bill actually makes energy in Minnesota both cleaner and cheaper. And I haven't heard someone make the case to me for why cleaner energy is worse for public health. And so I'm confused by that section. If you can just elaborate on that.
Well, I haven't read the latest iteration of the bill.
Okay.
But I will give you my understanding of some of the provisions. We're concerned about efforts to reduce or eliminate Minnesota's science-based climate reduction goals and carbon offset standard, and to create political gridlock around the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's Clean Power Plan state implementation plan. We are opposed to counting existing and new hydroelectric over 100 megawatts in the Renewable Energy Advanced Energy Standard. Existing hydro accounts for approximately 9% of existing electricity generation, and that would mean a rollback of new renewables built because of the Renewable Energy Standard. We oppose eliminating or sunsetting the Conservation Improvement Program. This program has saved consumers money and avoided construction of new power plants. We are concerned about changes to Minnesota's solar policy related to weakening the 1.5% by 2020 solar energy standard and eliminating the 10% by 2030 solar goal and value of solar tariff for community solar gardens. We oppose the repeal of Minnesota's nuclear moratorium, if only because that form of energy is extremely expensive and risk-prone. So these are some of the concerns, Mr. Chair, that have been raised about this legislation.
Well, in fairness, Mr. Snyder, you did say that you had not had a chance to review the newer draft of the bill. So if I could just ask, if you're going to have a press conference criticizing the chair's bill, please read the bill before you criticize it publicly. I think it's a reasonable request.
I'll do my best. Thank you.
Yep. And just one last thing. You had mentioned concerns about replacing other clean energies with the solar mandate. How does that an issue with public health? How is it that if we have identical sources of carbon-free, emission-free pollution, why is, from an environmental standpoint, is solar preferable to wind or hydro?
I think the question overall is to develop an appropriate mix of technologies, and we feel, I feel, that a healthy solar component of renewable energy is important for helping transition the state gradually and carefully from 58% coal-fired power to closer to 20% in the foreseeable future.
But from an environmental standpoint, whether it's 1.5% wind or 1.5% solar, it's the same environmental benefit, or do you disagree with that?
It is the same benefit in that sense, yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Snyder. Ms. Erickson, you're next. And then Mr. Frederick, John Frederick from, I don't have my glasses on, but it's John Frederick. So welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Mr. Chair, committee members, my name is Sarah Erickson. I work at United Strategies, and I'm representing DWEA, which is the Distributed Wind Energy Association. We are small-scaled wind. I want to speak specifically to Article 8, Section 5. It's on page 109 of this super fabulous, I think the chair called it, bill.
I think the correct term is legislative awesomeness, Ms. Erickson.
Excuse me.
All right, Representative David.
It's the energy storage, solar thermal, wind, and geothermal heat pump rebate program. We were interested in tax credits for small wind in the state of Minnesota. We work with Representative Garofalo. And specifically, we like the statewide nature of this program. Initially, ours was smaller, so we appreciate that. We also like that it applies to residential, commercial, and industrial property. Initially, ours was just small businesses and farms, so we appreciate that. In our original bill, we had a credit of up to 30% for installation and capital without a lesser provision. In this bill, it's a 30% rebate or a $15,000 whatever is lesser provision, and we're hoping that that's something we can work with the chair with as we go forward. But overall, we're very, very happy, and we want to thank the chair for this. We want to thank the chair and the staff for this including this. The one thing that I do want to point out that DWEA has concerns with is Article 9, Section 4, and it's the net metering provisions in this bill, specifically lines 117.19 to 117.21. And it's a cooperative electric association or municipality may charge additional fees to recover remaining fixed costs required to serve customers. And we understand that co-ops and munis have concerns with net metered customers. But our concerns with this language is that it's completely unrestrained. There's absolutely no checks and balances on what these fees may cost. And we're unsure about the calculations of these fees and if they're going to be reasonable or accurate. There's no consideration for the benefit of this type of energy production as it's put on the grid. And there's also no requirement that the amount or the decision-making process be public as it relates to this legislation. So currently, I believe that less than 1% of the customers in Minnesota are net meter, and we have concerns that co-ops and munis will use this new authority to level unreasonable fees on net metered customers.
Thank you, Ms. Erickson. Mr. Frederick? And then next is Mr. Sullivan, Joe Sullivan.
Mr. Chair, committee members, my name is John Frederick, and I've been with Silent Power for 6 years. I was Silent Power's CEO for several years, and I'm now a consultant to the new owners of Silent Power, a company named Backup Power Source. Silent Power designs, manufactures, customer-sided, utility-controlled energy storage equipment, and our facility is in Baxter, Minnesota. Backup Power Source has been in business since the year 2000 and is based in Slayton, Minnesota. And its primary business is battery backup power for homes and businesses. Backup Power Source is owned by Larry Henderson, disabled Vietnam War vet and successful business owner. I'd like to extend my thanks to the chair for his leadership on including energy storage in this omnibus bill. I also want to thank Representative O'Neill for chief authorship of House File 1320, much of which was incorporated in the omnibus bill, and also the co-authors, which was bipartisan. Silent Power has been a national leader in energy storage with utilities nationwide to conduct energy storage projects. The majority of these projects have involved reducing grid peak demand by storing off-peak energy and releasing it during periods of high demand. By shaving off these electrical peaks, utilities ratepayers avoid the expense of adding additional peaking facilities and increasing, it also defers capital expenditures on distribution plant. Energy storage could help reduce electric rates for members, customers of electric cooperatives and municipal electric utilities by reducing monthly demand charges that are part of the cooperative or municipal utilities wholesale purchase agreements. Placing energy storage at the very edge of the grid in people's homes and businesses provides maximum economic benefit for the utility. In addition, it provides the utility's residential or commercial customer with emergency backup power in the event of a blackout. Energy storage can also help address integrating renewable energy onto the grid. Energy storage can also be an important economic driver within Minnesota, creating hundreds of jobs in both the manufacture and installation of energy storage products. Silent Power has employed over 20 employees in good-paying technical and manufacturing jobs in central Minnesota. In addition, Silent Power has purchased components and services from over 20 companies, Minnesota companies in our supply chains, and they're listed in the handout that's going around. While this bill is very good, House File 1320 contained three very important components that we would like the committee to consider including in this bill. The first is limiting the size of energy storage system to 40 kilowatts. This will aim the rebate towards small commercial customers and residential customers. We would ask that the rebate amount be restored to 50% of the installed cost as originally proposed in House File 1320. Energy storage is a new emerging technology compared to some of the other eligible technologies in the bill. Small wind, geothermal, solar thermal have been in the deployment phase for 2 to 3 decades. Energy storage is much newer. The 50% rebate level has been the level used by successful state and federal grant and incentive programs for energy storage here in Minnesota and nationally. Along with lifting the rebate to 50%, we would also ask that the $20,000 cap be raised to $40,000. And finally, to make this energy policy bill also a job growth bill, we would ask that the committee follow the direction of House File 1320 to create an incentive for any energy storage manufacturers to locate their facilities in the state of Minnesota. By offering a higher level of rebate for in-state manufacturers, Minnesota would be more consistent with other states we compete in that offer higher rebates to their in-state manufacturers. In conclusion, we think many components of this bill is good. We were really pleased to see the energy storage component in it, and that's the conclusion of my comments.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sullivan. And then on deck is Mr. Evans from Xcel Energy. You're not Joe Sullivan.
I'm not Joe Sullivan. I wish I was. He's young and better looking, but what am I going to do?
Please state your name for the record, sir.
My name's Sheldon Strom. I'm with the Center for Energy and Environment. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on the bill. I especially appreciate the chair's willingness to work with us on our idea for an energy business accelerator and putting that in the bill. I think that is, in fact, an awesome part of the bill. Unfortunately, what I want to say today is I want to speak against the portion of the bill that would sunset the Conservation Improvement Program. There's been a discussion about that already. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Just want to remind people that Minnesota utilities have had this very successful program. Over the last 20 years, they've saved about $6 billion for their customers, saved about 82 million tons of carbon dioxide, all at a very low cost. I won't go into a lot of detail, but I think it's also important to realize that utilities don't save that energy directly. Customers save that energy with the utilities' help. The difference is that there's a lot of conservation potential in customer facilities, but customers have to agree to do it. And that's what makes the utilities' job hard. They have to convince a customer to make these improvements, and they have to do that with the customer's decision-making process and on their timetables. So what that means is lots of times it will take years from the beginning of a project to the end of the project, especially for larger projects. If the SIP program were terminated next year, a number of projects that are in place right now would be stopped in midstream. If SIP was then restarted, then we would have to restart that process again. And a big part of SIP is getting confidence from the customer that they're really going to get these results. So I think that would cause lots of problems, regardless of the intent of the chair. I think we can say that it is good to continually improve SIP. I have ideas for how to do it. I've talked to the department about some of those things. I've talked to utilities about that. But I don't think repealing SIP is going to drive that conservation. The people that I've talked to feel that it actually ends that conversation. The legislature has a lot of authority. If you create a task force to work on SIP and require that they bring back to you their best recommendations, everyone will take that very seriously. Everyone will be held accountable in that process. So we really don't think you need to end the SIP program in order to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strom. I appreciate your testimony. Yep. And you're better looking than Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Evans, on deck is John, is it Dukic? Did I say that right? You're on deck. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Rick Evans with XL Energy. I'd like to just make some brief comments about the section of the bill that begins on page 141 that has to do with performance-based multi-year rate plans. I want to thank the chair for including this in his bill. This was the same language that's in the bill today was in House File 1315, authored by Representative Garofalo, Hortman, Baker, Isaacson, Scott, and Mahoney. In the meantime, well, let me start by saying the genesis of this bill was an effort that, started by the Great Plains Institute called E21, where a group of environmentalists, business customers, utilities, and other stakeholders got together and started thinking about how could we reform the rate-making process in Minnesota, which is several decades old, so that it was more in keeping with the modern electric utility that we see today and that we see coming down the road. The language that's in the bill right now was not a consensus among that group, but it was as close as we got to consensus when the legislature convened. And we wanted to move this process forward. In the meantime, while the bill was being heard over in the other body, we've been working with the Department of Commerce and actually have come up with, I think, a very good product, which we're hoping will be amended into this bill later this week. The essence of the bill, and I should say that the new version of the bill, I think, will be easier to read than the version that's in the bill right now. It is somewhat complicated how rates are made, but I think we've improved on the bill in conjunction with a lot of negotiations. The essence of the bill is to get the utilities like XL Energy out of the situation we're in now, which is almost a constant series of rate cases. As we continue to make investments across our service territory, we find ourselves in nearly annual rate cases going forward. That's not good for us because it takes an enormous amount of time. It's not good for the Department of Commerce and the PUC because it takes an enormous amount of time. And it's not good for our customers, both our business and residential customers, because they're unable to really predict what their rates, what their energy costs are going to be in the future, because they're always in a series of interim rates and refunds and interim rates and refunds as we go through these rate cases. So this expands what the new version, the amendment that we hope to see added on Friday will do is expand the current multi-year rate plan to permit it to go up to 5 years. It's currently limited at 3. And then it's somewhat more specific about what utilities may propose to make this work. And essentially, without getting to a lot of the details, though I'd be happy to talk with anyone who'd like some more information about it, it essentially puts the utility on a 5-year budget so that our customers can see what their rates are going to be year upon year upon year for the 5 years of the plan. It requires the utility to manage their business within those caps, within those formula, really are what they are, as formulas going forward. But all along the way, the regulators continue to have oversight, continue to be able to ensure that we're not over-earning, or we can come in and say, gee, we're under-earning if the plan isn't working out. But it allows us to go hopefully up to 5 years without having to refile another rate case and manage our business, again, under the supervision of the regulators. We think that's going to free up a lot of our time to start dealing with some of these issues that are now we see coming towards us, including greater demand for customer choice, customers demanding more predictability in their rates, upgrading and changing our distribution grid so that we can accommodate more of the kinds of energies that our customers want to see. The kinds of things that, frankly, we really can't do now if we are constantly in the state of regulatory handcuffs, frankly, with constant rate cases. So that's the intent of it. Again, I'd be happy to answer questions with individual members if you have them on how this is going to work. We are having an amendment drafted, and I'm hoping that can be offered and put on Friday that'll perhaps make this a little clearer than the language we have right now. And again, I can't speak for the other members of E21. They can speak for themselves. Some of them like it a lot. Some of them like it not so much. Some of them are in between, so they can speak for themselves. But we have been working very hard with all the stakeholders and with the Department of Commerce and have come up with what I think will be a good bill. It is included in the bill in the other body, not that anyone here needs to care about that, but we have been working in the other body as well, and I think we've got a good product.
There's another body, Mr. Evans?
I'm told, yeah.
All right, 2 p.m. on Friday is the deadline, Mr. Evans. So thank you for your testimony. Mr. Dukic, and then on deck is Lynn Hinkle.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, John Dukic with the Minnesota High Tech Association, and I'd just like to thank you, Mr. Chair, for fully funding the SciTech Experience internship program at $2 million over the next couple of years. And I'd like to thank you, Representative Lunan, for authoring the original bill, House File 713. This is a program that connects college students studying science, technology, engineering, and mathematics with paid internships at small to medium-sized companies throughout Minnesota. I know it's something that companies and students desperately need, so we thank you for that.
Thank you. Mr. Henkel and Joel Johnson, you're on deck. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Lynn Hinkle. I'm Policy Director for the Minnesota Solar Energy Industry Association. I appreciate the opportunity to provide comments this evening. As you're well aware of, there is considerable content in all of the last iterations, including the DE1 that is before you this evening, that would significantly impact the Minnesota solar industry. Your proposed incentive programs for net metered facilities and solar thermal, as well as energy storage, as you've already heard, are positive, but seem calculated to offset significant damage to the Solar Energy Industry Association proposed elsewhere in your bill. From Mencia's standpoint, these new incentive programs fall far short of offsetting the damage to Minnesota solar that would result from implementing most of the other solar provisions that you propose. The list of damaging solar proposals includes a negation of the solar energy standard and objective, the elimination of the carve-out of 10% for small facilities that are solar-powered, an immediate halt to any new applicants for solar rewards or Made in Minnesota incentives, the repeal of the value of solar language, the undoing of long-standing net metering law and prohibitive solar permitting for large solar projects. Every segment of Minnesota's solar market would be damaged even if only one of these solar provisions were approved. New industries grow based on certainty, and the uncertainty conveyed by pushing even one of these 6 proposals would be very damaging. What's at stake is not just how our solar policies will chill a range of investments such as a new Minnesota module manufacturing plant. And I have to say, we've got 2 new solar module manufacturing facilities and 1 new solar thermal manufacturing facility as a result of the laws that are in place right now, or a large solar project, or a solar garden, but how it undermines some very intense and transparent stakeholder processes put in place to build the Minnesota solar industry. Of course, one of the reasons Minnesotans all across the state have participated in solar development discussions, and I'm sure many of you have been in rooms where some of this kind of discussion was going forward. These discussions are based on the fact that people understand that something new is happening. No, the sun's not new, but solar's distributed energy potential has really caught people's attention. Beyond that, they're encouraged and organized to be heard. This has the feel of how Minnesota and our democracy is supposed to work. For each of your solar damaging proposals, there is an organized stakeholder process for solar development. For example, the 8 community hearings all over the state for public input for the Aurora project, following a very transparent and public multi-year PUC deliberation. The stakeholder process for solar permitting convened by DER, the extremely rigorous value of solar process that followed statutory layers of public input and deliberation at the PUC. It is well known that the level of public input in a large number of solar-related dockets at the PUC is unprecedented. Solar policies in Minnesota have spawned a new wave of public engagement and grassroots activity that deserves to be supported, not stifled. Make no mistake, and I'll try to wrap up here as fast as I can. I know I'm getting to the end of the time that's available for me. I appreciate the indulgence of the chair and the committee. MNCEA understands that solar is just one component of the multi-sector clean energy economy in Minnesota, defined by DEED in their recent analysis. DEED has identified this cluster as a focus for job growth in Minnesota, and we agree that Minnesota is positioned well to compete with other states for growth of this cluster. Recent metrics supplied by the Solar Foundation show that Minnesota solar jobs have grown to 1,800 good jobs in the state. MNCEA understands that solar job growth is intertwined with developing more wind capacity and energy efficiency, and your proposed bill stunts each of these other categories, specifically sunsetting SIP with no defined replacement process and allowing large hydro from Canada to count towards the RES instead of a Minnesota wind-based RES will retard clean energy job growth in Minnesota. What I want to make clear is that this negatively impacts solar, even if all the damaging solar-specific proposals were withdrawn. We think we agree, and this will get to a point where hopefully there feels like there's more of an invitation to partnership. We think we agree that policy driven by market data is better than policy spun from ideology. When sweeping solar legislation was passed in 2013, it was clear to many people that it would take some time for the policies to be expressed in the market. That is beginning to happen with community solar gardens, new solar manufacturing that's recently come to Minnesota based on the SES and Made in Minnesota, and development of large-scale solar projects. Clear heads need to remind everyone that experience in the market is key to making any policy adjustments, and MNCEA looks forward to working with the chair and other members of this committee in that project. That concludes my remarks, and if there are any questions, happy to answer those at this time or at some point in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Henkel. Joel Johnson, you're up, and then next is Sue Abderholden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Joel Johnson. I represent the Minnesota Rural Electric Association. I'd like to thank the chair for the introduction of this bill and for your willingness to listen to the concerns and policy suggestions of electric co-ops. We think you've put together a solid bill with a balance between moving towards laudable goals like carbon reduction and important ratepayer protection. We particularly appreciate the refocus on costs and ratepayers. We think as a state we've strayed from that focus over the past decade and too often put the needs of certain segments of the industry ahead of ratepayers. Provisions we think that will help keep the cost of electricity affordable include the net metering reform, the potential SIP redesign, the flexibility added to the RES, and others. We thank you for all of that. As far as net metering is concerned, as most of you know, electric co-ops were the main drivers behind many of these provisions. We have been pushing for reform for a number of years, not because we're opposed to distributed generation for our members, but because of what we see as the inherent unfairness of the current net metering statute and the threat it poses to our ability to maintain a healthy grid, particularly in rural areas of the state. Just as a reminder, we serve 85% of the geographic area in the state and have more miles of distribution lines than all of the IOUs combined. And we have fewer customers per mile of line to pay for the upkeep and maintenance of those lines. As you know, under current net metering law, electric co-ops and other utilities pay retail rates for excess renewable generation below 40 kW. I think most people understand that a business is not going to stay in business if they're selling their product at the same price they buy it. However, that's not the main issue we have with the law. The law is, we see the law as unsustainable because it allows net metered customers to avoid paying for the infrastructure that is required to provide them with electricity when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. Without cost-effective storage, DG doesn't work without the grid, and maintaining the grid costs money. When someone nets out their use, when they produce as much energy as they use, they don't pay anything for the cost of the infrastructure that it's embedded in the kW a kilowatt hour. These costs are then shifted onto their neighbors. As penetration levels of DG increase, which they are doing dramatically now, that undermines the viability of the grid as more and more customers shift the cost of paying for the grid onto fewer and fewer of their neighbors, while at the same time sending more and more overpriced electricity onto the grid. I've heard it said in this committee that there are costs shifting in all of rate making. And technically that's true. If you live close to a substation, it costs less to connect you to the grid than it does someone a mile down the line, though you'll typically end up paying the same rates. What we're talking about with net metering is dramatically exceeds those shifted costs. At the typical rural electric cooperative, those shifted costs can easily exceed $1,000 annually for someone who completely nets out their use. So again, this is really about fairness and paying for the services you use. If we're allowed to recover costs it takes to serve DG customers, electric co-ops instantly become agnostic about distributed generation on our lines. Frankly, we see a day coming fairly soon when distributed solar and other types of distributed generation will be the most cost-effective way of delivering electricity to some of our members. I think, too, with all of the community solar programs we've developed over the past year and a half, we've also demonstrated that there are ways to help our members who want to invest in solar do it without asking their neighbors to pay for it. Turning back to the rest of the bill, we'd also like to thank the chair and the author for including the state match during FEMA disasters. This is going to make dealing with the aftermath of storms a lot easier and simpler for rural areas of the state. I'll just address two other components of the bill real quick. The first is the changes to the Conservation Improvement Program. We've talked a lot over the past years about the struggle co-ops have had with the SIP program and the need for an extended conversation about how best to encourage cost-effective conservation, particularly all of the savings that is taking place outside of the utility setting. We support this and hope this is the beginning of that conversation. Finally, we would like to express our opposition to using Xcel's Renewable Development Fund as a source for funding of rebates and incentives outside their service territory. We would loudly oppose having our members subsidize solar arrays, ground source heat pumps, conservation, et cetera, other technologies outside of our service territory. And we don't think it's fair to ask Xcel customers to do that throughout the state. We hope that there'll be an opportunity to revisit this as we move forward. We also have concerns that any rebates would be tailored to Xcel, and we think it's better that utilities develop their own rebates to fit their own system needs. There's a lot more we like about the bill: the state approval for any state implementation plan, the changes to the RES, the recognition of the differences between the types of utilities. But we've testified mostly on those previously. But again, thank you for listening to our concerns and policy suggestions, and I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Next, Sue Abderholden, and then on deck is Jan Hubbard. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Sue Abderholden, Executive Director of NAMI, Minnesota, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. To recover from a mental illness, you need access to mental health treatment, but also access to a home and a job. NAMI appreciates the fact that you've included the same level of funding as the governor's budget for two programs, the IPS Employment Program, Individual Placement and Supports, and the Bridges Housing Program, both of which serve people with a serious mental illness. This level of funding will allow us to continue the new IPS projects that were started the last biennium. And the IPS program really is an evidence-based practice. We have terrific outcomes because we actually integrate mental health and vocational rehab. You've also included an increased access to affordable housing through the Bridges Housing Program. All too often, we have people with a serious mental illness who are discharged from residential treatment or hospital to the streets, making it really impossible for them to get better. So thank you for doing your part to build on what works in our mental health system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jan Hubbard, and on deck is Bill Black. Are you Jan Hubbard?
Yes, I'm Jan Hubbard.
Is it Dan or Jan?
Jan with the J.
Okay, welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you. Jan Hubbard. I'm the Business Development Director for the Rural Renewable Energy Alliance. People also know us as REAL. We're located in Pine River, about a half-hour drive north of Brainerd. And we manufacture and install solar, electric and solar thermal equipment. And we have a nonprofit mission of making solar available and accessible to everyone. A part of our business is a made in Minnesota qualified solar powered furnace, which is a product that we've made and have patented, and it's been around since early 2000. Recently, we became qualified as a made in Minnesota manufacturer and business partner for Conserval, which is a product called Solar Wall, used on commercial buildings. And first thing I want to say is I want to thank the chair and the committee for including solar thermal rebates in the bill, and especially making it available statewide. One of the problems with the solar thermal rebate in the past has been that it hasn't been aligned well with delivered fuels. It's only been available to the investor-owned utility customers who have mostly natural gas. And it's much more practical to use solar thermal with propane. It makes makes heating in rural Minnesota much more affordable by reducing fuel costs by 25 and as much as 50%. One of the things that concerned me was the transfer of funds that was proposed in the earlier draft of the Omnibus Energy Bill. I couldn't find it in the new printing. I did find something on Section 8 on line 9.1, transfer of funds. Then that $300,000, it was being transferred to a propane users fund. So that would actually, I believe, not be as efficient use of the funds. because the solar thermal technology actually will reduce people's heating bills for the life of the system, which can be 40 to 50 years. I'm also concerned about the elimination of Made in Minnesota program for solar thermal. That's on line 134.12, section 16. Made in Minnesota has brought 3 PV manufacturers, including Silicon Energy, Helene, and iTech, to Minnesota, and 1 Canadian solar thermal manufacturer, Conserval, a solar wall product. And that's been in the last year or so. Program is in its second year now, and limiting the program sends the wrong signal to businesses considering Minnesota manufacturing investments. It takes time to acquire investments, build businesses, create jobs, and recoup those investments. The program has just started. I foresee this program continuing, creating hundreds of jobs in the solar thermal area and millions of dollars over the life of the program. Eliminating solar thermal would also have a devastating effect on real and our investments in creating jobs and making heating with propane and delivered fuels more affordable in rural Minnesota. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Mr. Black, and on deck is Kathy Hollander.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Bill Black. I'm with the Minnesota Municipal Utilities Association. On behalf of the 125 municipal electric utilities in the state of Minnesota, I'd like to thank you for bringing forth this legislation that provides a lot of positive changes that would help municipal utilities to serve their communities across the state. On a couple of the major provisions, especially affecting municipal utilities, the Conservation Improvement Program, I think, Mr. Chair, you're very right that everyone who looks carefully at it realizes that it is in desperate need of an overhaul, or it cannot last much longer. Opening the conversation to really look at the issues and see where we're going with conservation in Minnesota from utility perspectives, including the fact that we've got to get the customers to do this. That was brought up, and it's a very important part of the conversation. And getting a group together of folks who deal with this in and out day to day and have for years, I think, is a very positive step forward. It also makes sense in light of the Clean Power Plan that will be coming from the EPA in the coming couple of years. We need to get in sync with that if we're going to be able to meet our obligations under federal law that are becoming enforced through the Pollution Control Agency. So those, I think, are very positive developments in order to get the conversation going. On the topic of net metering, the provisions for the recovery of the fixed costs for the cooperatives and the municipals, I think is a very positive step forward and simply a matter of fairness. I think it's been looked at too much as winners and losers and pitting one side against another, when really it's just a matter of recovering the costs that it takes to serve the customers and not to distribute those to non-cost causer utility customers. The bill also would allow customers to receive a retail rate bill credit or avoided cost cash payments for their excess energy put onto the grid. I think that's a very positive step forward and appreciate your inclusion of that in the bill. Thirdly, the issue of greenhouse gas, the state greenhouse gas provisions. Tying them to the Clean Power Plan, I think, makes very good sense. We need to see where the federal government is going with this and make sure that we can keep up with whatever we need to do and not be doing extra work that isn't useful to eliminating greenhouse gases. And finally, on the issue of the combined heat and power, I appreciate that the changes to the greenhouse gas laws alleviate some of the problems that we had with the combined heat and power issue. There are issues that are sort of on the perimeter of the combined heat and power and cogeneration issue that are coming forward in PUC dockets in the near future. And I won't go into those. They're not really part of this legislation. I just wanted to alert the committee that those are issues that we may have to take looks at in the future because of some of the groups involved and some of the rhetoric about moving towards the types of situations they have in non-regulated states coming to Minnesota, where customers are encouraged to go around their local utility to buy energy directly from the open wholesale market. These are issues that haven't come before you here, but I wanted to let you know that they're there because as we look at combined heat and power issues, we may have to come back to that. But we appreciate a very positive bill, and thank you very much for bringing it.
Mr. Black, can you just, a minute ago, you referenced, I didn't catch the interaction with the combined heat and power aspect of it with regards to the 111D. Maybe I misheard you. What was it you were saying?
The combined heat and power, exempting them from the greenhouse gas emissions originally in the previous version of the bill, created a problem with that for us in understanding who was going to be responsible for those emissions, but because of the Clean Power Plan. But when you linked the Clean Power Plan to the state emission, I think you took care of that problem for us.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Representative Mahoney. And next is Kathy Hollander, and then after that is Will Neeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just wondering if your organization has any take on rebates and incentives being paid for in your particular service area using money from XL ratepayers.
Mr. Chair, Representative Mahoney, we have that concern as well. It had been covered in previous testimony. I didn't want to take more time on it, but it is a concern. We don't have a steadfast position on it that we've discussed that I could bring forward tonight, but it is a concern, and we definitely would not want to expand contributions into that fund from other sources that were unrelated to what's in the bill now.
Representative Mahoney.
So you'd be upset if your members had to pay for rebates in XL areas, service area?
Mr. Black.
Chair, Representative Mahoney, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Kathy Hollander. And Mr. Neeson's on deck if he's here. Where's Mr. Neeson? Cool, thanks. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you. Kathy Hollander. First time testifying, so I'll do my best. I'm with Minnesota 350. I am their legislative liaison. I'm a full-time volunteer with them. Thank you for the chance to testify. At Minnesota 350, we are proud of Minnesota, just as all of us are. When Minnesota's greenhouse gas emissions grew twice as fast as the national average over the 15-year period prior to 2005, we saw that we had a problem. We identified electrical generation as the largest contributor and took steps to address the problem. The state took a very large problem, broke it into smaller pieces, and started working on it. For years, we have had groundbreaking legislation with very clear goals and timelines. Like any good management system, Minnesota agencies even monitor our progress towards these goals through a biennial report to the legislature. Likewise, we're proud of our renewable energy standard and the fact that we as a state set strong goals for the percentage of electricity that must come from renewables. We support increasing those renewable energy standards. We do not support any attempt to take away these powerful statements and replace them with weaker laws. Our existing statute even says, quote, "The framework and strategy should aim to make Minnesota the first state in the nation to use only renewable energy," end quote. We are proud of that statement. And that goal is as worthwhile as aiming to win the Super Bowl or the NBA championship. How many dollars would be brought into our state if we achieved even 80% renewables? People would be traveling here to see how we did it, instead of traveling to Germany where solar panels dot the roofs of many homes in Bavaria. Our fairly new solar standard is likewise powerful. David Schaefer of the Star Tribune described Minnesota as the place where the nation's most consumer-driven expansion of solar power was beginning back in December. In XL territory with community gardens, many people will be able to afford solar power and purchase electricity for less than they are currently buying power from XL. Churches are actively investigating the use of community solar. I've been to many of those meetings. I echo Lynn Hinkle's comments about the excitement that's around the use of community gardens and solar. I'm proud of the community garden that's supposed to be going up on Lake Street too, and hope to be an active member of that garden. I hope that this committee promotes wind and solar as the way of the future. There's more Minnesota jobs in solar than coal or large hydro from out of our state. At Minnesota 350, we speak against any attempt to change net metering or the true value of solar. How much money could we keep at home here in our state if we did not have to import coal from out of state? We're concerned about the weakening of the Next Generation Energy Act. Why would we want to keep importing a product that produces damaging particles in the air, which we then breathe in, and poisons our kids with mercury even before they're born? We've heard testimony, many of us have, that 1 out of 10 children in 2 harbors have elevated levels of mercury in their blood. We all know change is hard for people whose jobs are directly affected, but that does not mean we do not make the difficult decisions that need to be made. Public health and safety are at stake. Even the Department of Defense 2014 Climate Change Adaptation Roadmap identifies climate change as a national security risk and a threat multiplier, as it has the potential to exacerbate many of the challenges we're facing today, changing precipitation patterns and more extreme weather events. But this cannot be an excuse for delaying action. Politics or ideology must not get in the way of sound planning, end quote. Much of this bill seems to take Minnesota in the wrong direction, away from increasing the renewable energy standards, deleting planning for a clean energy future, conservation and energy efficiency programs, and away from community solar. As such, we cannot support these sections of the bill. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And Mr. Neeson, you're next. And then Mr. Pearson. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Will Nissen. I'm a Senior Policy Associate at Fresh Energy. I'm here to testify in opposition to the Omnibus bill. Our organization feels that this bill erodes or rolls back over 30 years of bedrock energy policy that have driven our state forward here in Minnesota. In particular, of most concern to us is the repeal of our conservation improvement programs. While I commend the chair for trying to maximize the efficiency of those programs, continue to optimize our energy system, we do feel that the approach of creating a sunset in statute carries a tremendous amount of risk and uncertainty, and for us, that is unacceptable. We definitely appreciate an opportunity to participate or have a statewide conversation about those programs. I've said it before to this committee, but energy efficiency is the cheapest and cleanest energy resource we have here in the state. It saves participants money who participate directly in the SIP programs and creates downward pressure on rates for all other customers by avoiding the need to build new generation. And while it's true, Mr. Chair, you mentioned that there are a lot of innovations and advancements happening in this field, and it's been said before that a lot of that efficiency happens outside of the utilities' control. We feel that it is the wrong step to put a sunset or repeal one of the best energy policies we've had at keeping both rates and bills low in the state. Other measures in the bill that we have concerns with include eliminating the number targets for the state's carbon emission reduction goals. These have been critical in driving key innovative policies here in the state. We also are opposed watering down the renewable energy standard with adding new hydro as an eligible technology. We're concerned about legislative approval for a state plan and the Clean Power Plan, as this can jeopardize Minnesota's current flexibility in developing the right plan that best meets our state's energy needs and puts us at risk of being susceptible to a federally imposed plan. My colleague will testify to the net metering and value of solar pieces of the bill. But we are also opposed to watering down the solar energy standard, as Representative Hortman discussed earlier in the hearing. And finally, Fresh Energy has never supported using the Renewable Development Fund for dollars to go to specific technologies, and we support the original intent of the fund, which is to drive research and development of alternative energy technologies. And with that, I'll answer any questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. We're just taking testimony, no questions, but appreciate your testimony. Yep. Mr. Pearson? Jim Pearson. Pass? Okay. Then say pass. Don't look at me. Ellen Fresh Energy, Ellen Gluckner.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thanks. My name is Alan Gleckner with Fresh Energy, and I'm testifying today. My colleague Will addressed our larger concerns with the bill. I'm going to be speaking specifically to net metering and the repeal of the value of solar tariff. Changes to the laws governing compensation for customer-owned and installed renewable energy in this bill are a major step backwards, namely gutting net metering for small customer-owned systems and repealing the IOU option for value of solar tariff. Net metering is a bedrock energy policy. Minnesota passed its net metering law over 20 years ago, and it is the principal policy for customers who choose to own their own renewable energy. This bill allows municipal utilities and co-ops to charge special fees that are limited just to net metering customers without limits. Essentially, munis and co-ops can charge higher and higher fees on their net metering customers until those customers take down their small solar or wind systems, and can do so without any justification as far as we can tell in the bill. For IOU customers who are net metering on small systems, the bill completely guts their compensation for the generation that their systems provide that rolls over from month to month, similar to cell phone rollover minutes. Essentially changing it from the retail rate to avoided cost would lessen it by about, by dividing by 3 or 4, I'd say. The committee has heard testimony repeatedly about fairness and cross subsidies as a result of net metering. What this committee hasn't seen is any actual evidence of that happening. We hear it again and again, but haven't seen any evidence or reports or studies that have been vetted showing that these exist or that there's some unfairness happening. Instead, the only analysis we've seen in the state has been through the value of solar process, and that has shown that small customer-owned systems provide a net benefit to the system. And so the repeated testimony we've heard about cross-subsidy completely ignore all these benefits and focus completely on the costs without any evidence. This change to net metering, which essentially kills it in the state, hurts Minnesota customers who wish to finance, own, and control their own electricity and contribute to advancing Minnesota's energy system. On the subject of repealing the value of solar option for investor-owned utilities, there's simply no reason to repeal the value of solar option. It's as an option for investor-owned utilities only, it's an opt-in that they can choose in lieu of net metering. So if they don't like net metering, this is another option for them, and it's structured in such a way that if they're concerned about lost sales from distributed customer-owned systems, that provides some relief. And again, it's only an opt-in, so they don't like it, they can ignore it. And so repealing it at this point would just waste a lot of time and effort that went into it, strong analysis, and really provide no benefit. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And when you get a chance, not tonight, but later on, I really do want to sit down with you and go over the net metering stuff, because I have different interpretations of the language I intended, but if I drafted it wrong, I want to make sure you and I are on the same page. So.
Yeah, no, and we're totally open to looking at some options that I think could address some of the concerns that would have far less of an impact. So happy to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who did I say was next? Beth Soholt.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members. First of all, thank you for hearing testimony on this lengthy bill.
Can you say your name for the record?
Yes, I'm sorry. You know me.
Oh, I know you are, but the tape doesn't know in 100
Sure.
years.
Thank you,
so.
Mr. Chair. I am Beth Soholt with Wind on the Wires. So first I wanted to point out that we appreciate your focus on a cleaner and cheaper supply of electricity for Minnesotans. We have not been through the 164-page bill that was just posted at 6 o'clock tonight in fine detail, every line, but I want to comment on a few things. We We appreciate the conversations that we've had with you on wind and what's new with wind since the RES, the Renewable Energy Standard, was put in place in 2007. The 2007 legislature was put in place really to drive renewables in Minnesota for investment in Minnesota. Some utilities have selected to have more flexibility and to do their resources outside of the state of Minnesota, which is fine, but we have at least 80% of the renewable energy standard that has been met through resources in Minnesota. So wind energy has been very good for Minnesota and has helped keep electric prices low for ratepayers across the state. We appreciate the provisions in the bill that would concentrate on other wind things like the repowering provision, but we feel that without an increase in the renewable energy standard, businesses like wind companies who are investing millions of dollars and billions of dollars in the state literally, and who are paying millions of dollars of taxes and providing local benefits, they lack the certainty they need to continue investing in Minnesota. Minnesota will lose the benefits of jobs and further economic development to local communities by not increasing the renewable energy standard. Minnesota has done a lot of work along with our utilities, setting the stage to look at increasing the renewable energy standard, including doing a very robust engineering study to show that adding additional renewables can be done in a reliable manner with a modest amount of investment to allow that to happen. One of the key provisions I just need to touch on because it is disappointing is that the hydro provision that allows new hydro put in service as of January 1st, 2015 to count towards the renewable energy standard would swamp the increase in any potential renewable energy standard. And so we are very concerned about that provision. Allowing those resources to meet a Minnesota renewable energy standard does nothing to benefit Minnesotans. Doesn't create jobs here in Minnesota. We literally are just sending our money out of the state. So in trying to think about what the key question I should really leave folks thinking about, I focused on this one for me at least. The bill has a lot of, it would send people off in a lot of discussion about what way we should progress in the future when we already have good policies in place that we could build upon. And so changing the renewable energy standard, what qualifies, and not increasing so that Minnesota can continue to see investments. The key question for me is this: what keeps Minnesota moving forward with clean energy investments in the next 5 years? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dariel Dannon. Is Mr. Dariel Dannon here? No? Okay. Sarah Pisick? Did I skip over someone? Did I skip over someone there or not? No? Okay, all right. Dave.
Mr. Chair and members, I'm Sarah Pisick. I represent the Minnesota Tourism Growth Coalition, which represents more than 100 tourism organizations and businesses across the state. I just want to say thank you for the bipartisan support and investment in this bill for Explore Minnesota tourism. As you know, travel and tourism in Minnesota generates $13 billion in gross sales, more than $35 million a day. Tourism represents 250,000 full and part-time jobs in Minnesota, which is 11% of the total private sector employment, and about almost $4.5 billion in wages. Revenue in the state is, there's $840 million in state sales tax revenue generated from tourism, and for every $1 in state and local dollars invested in tourism, over $6 is returned to the state. So again, I just want to thank you for the support of this economic development initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Warren Innes is up next, please. Ward, excuse me. Ward?
Can you just say pass?
I don't think so.
Ward, or, oh.
I keep saying pass.
Want to pass, thank you, I'm sorry. Very well. We don't have anybody else on our list, but if anybody else would like to come forward and speak on the bill, please do so. And just come forward and introduce yourself. In favor or opposing the bill? Folks can just get in line, I suppose. That'd be fine, too.
There's all sorts of seats down in front.
Yep, come on in. Good evening, thanks for coming, and your name, please, for the
Thank
record.
you. David Stryer, Director with Silicon Energy. Mr. Chair and members, Silicon Energy is a Minnesota solar PV module manufacturer based in Mountain Iron, Minnesota. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify here tonight, and also to the chairman for his willingness to engage in a dialogue with us over the last couple of months and hear our concerns. Our owners invested nearly $10 million into our manufacturing plant in Mountain Iron on the Iron Range, largely on the basis of the Made in Minnesota program, initially set up as a rebate program in 2010 and subsequently modified into a production-based incentive program in 2013. The logic of this program was simple. The economic benefits of solar manufacturing and solar in general should stay local. Minnesota taxpayers, in my experience, and ratepayers, they prefer a locally manufactured product. The money stays in state rather than flowing outstate into foreign countries. The proposed elimination of the Made in Minnesota program in House File 843 will force us to shutter the Mountain Iron manufacturing plant, and will force us to lay off the workers there as well as in our marketing office in the Twin Cities, including my job. I'm a little biased here. Many in America, including policymakers on the national and local level, are working to increase our manufacturing base and increase manufacturing jobs. This bill would take an opposite approach that would eliminate solar manufacturing jobs in our fine state. Most policymakers and the general public understand that businesses need to, or attempt to, eliminate uncertainty in their business plans. The Made in Minnesota solar program was set up and implemented as a 10-year performance-based incentive that would establish payments to consumers for 10 years, a 10-year payment stream that allows for certainty and structure for our customers. To eliminate a 10-year program only in its second year of operation would send a strongly negative message to businesses and to consumers who rely on stable state policy instructions. Informing their business plans and business models, businesses simply cannot have a start-stop cycle in state policy. Incentives created under the Made in Minnesota program do not go directly to manufacturers such as Silicon Energy. They go to the end user, residential or non-residential customers of the utilities who hire an installer that pays for the design, the engineering of a solar system, and the local labor used to install that system. PV module cost is usually less than half of the given system's total cost. The remainder is labor, engineering, racking materials, and balance of system. Thus, Made in Minnesota program is not only responsible for driving job growth in the manufacturing sector, but also in the installers and the developers and the laborers that install these Made in Minnesota solar systems. Installers could move to a different state with stable solar incentives. Solar manufacturing plants, like us, are capital investments that are rooted here in Minnesota. And we are proud to have solar customers in the hundreds and in the thousands across the state of our fellow Minnesotans who are enjoying the electricity generated by our products. Solar manufacturing is an extremely competitive business. Chinese market share of the U.S. solar market has gone from about 9% in 2011 to 86% last year. That's a dramatic increase. The U.S. International Trade Group recently found that Chinese subsidies ranging from 27 to 50% of the ad valorem cost of a solar PV module were damaging U.S. manufacturers, not just ourselves, but our fellow U.S. manufacturers. Indeed, the tidal wave of dumped and heavily subsidized Chinese imports are largely responsible for the reduction of our homegrown solar manufacturing industry. We are proud to say that our products are manufactured in the USA and manufactured here in Minnesota. Not all solar is the same. There are huge differences and variations in the design and the performance of solar PV modules, especially with the extreme varying climate factors we have here in Minnesota that we have to engineer for and manufacture for. The foreign bias shown in this bill does not evaluate or scrutinize the engineering, the design, the durability, or the sustainability of a PV module. It treats them all the same, the way that we interpret it. Further, it does not do anything to enhance or to incentivize the R&D aspects to solar manufacturing that are crucial for the U.S. to innovate and to differentiate its products away from the standard foreign modules and other parts of the solar supply chain. We're in the second year of the current Made in Minnesota program that is in place to provide stability and certainty against the backdrop of the expiring federal solar tax incentives, as well as that wave of imported standard modules that I talked about from foreign countries. Silicon Energy feels that it has held up our end of the bargain. It invested in Minnesota millions of dollars and engaged in real manufacturing of a distinctive solar product that has won numerous awards for innovation and for contributing to the solar solar globally as well as on the local scale. The Minnesota solar industry is really at an early stage of development. According to Mencia, last year it created over 1,000 jobs. We appreciate your desire to review the program and perhaps make changes as needed. We look forward to working with you and engaging in a dialogue while we work to keep our manufacturing plant intact up on the Iron Range. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you very much. Cy Vang. Is there a Cy Vang here? No? Okay. Ann Kilzer. Hello, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Ann Kilzer. I'm the director of the Minnesota Workforce Council Association. I too just saw the bill this evening, but would like to address a few points if I may. We'd like to thank you for the language that allows for additional dislocated worker training to occur for incumbent workers once the needs of dislocated workers have been addressed in every area of the state. We are a little concerned about the amount of funding that's being spent out of the Workforce Development Fund, in addition to the reduction of the workforce development fee at the same time. There are several mass layoffs that are occurring in the state, both in the metro, excuse me, I have a really bad cold, and in greater Minnesota currently. And so we just want to make sure that the needs of dislocated workers are taken care of, in addition to balancing the needs of other job training programs. There's some language in the bill for adult training programs, but it only funds 3 of the 16 workforce service areas across the state. The way that bill was originally written, which Representative Lean carried, it took into account 3 formula factors that would address the workforce training needs for adults across the state. So we'd ask you to relook at that and possibly do a formula allocation as opposed to picking 3 workforce service areas out of the 16. And finally, there's funding for the career outreach to schools, which we're very grateful for, but it's still linked with some unrelated labor market information funding. The 2 pieces were coupled together in the budget bill in the last biennium, and we'd ask that those 2 appropriations be separated again for the labor market information funding and the outreach to schools funding, so that we don't have to work with the Department of Employment and Economic Development with that one appropriation to determine how much was intended for each of the 2 programs. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hope you get better.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that.
Mr. Ottinger, did you wish to testify? And just, unless I've missed my notes here, these are all the people who have signed up so far. So after this, if you are interested in testifying and you want to be at the front of the list, I would contact our very helpful committee pages who are right over here. I am told that if you tip them, you move to the front of the line. I don't know if that's true or not, but I don't think there's no rule against it, is there, Representative Mahoney?
Would that follow the tip penalty bill?
Oh.
Well played.
I kind of walked into that, didn't I? Yeah, all right.
You do that a lot.
Yeah. Well, you're a stupid head, so there. Welcome to the committee, sir. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the tip worked. I'll let you know that. I'm John Hottinger, and I'm here representing the Minnesota North Star chapter of the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club has 14,000 members. It's a membership-driven organization so that our policies are driven by our members. And, Mr. Chairman, first I want to thank you for vetting your bill significantly before you held this hearing. It gave people an opportunity to look at and evaluate it, and that's greatly appreciated. And I think we could agree that Minnesota's clean energy and climate policies should be evaluated and reformed as needed. But we believe that should be done in an attempt to transition Minnesota's energy system and economy from fossil fuels to no-carbon, renewable sources to improve air and water quality, reduce the impacts of climate change, create economic benefits and jobs for all Minnesotans, and to create a resilient, affordable, and reliable energy system and economy. In Minnesota's clean energy transition, we support the following principles and think they should be considered: setting benchmarks and optimizing energy savings, renewable resources, and greenhouse gas pollution reductions to achieve Minnesota's science-based climate goals. Invest in least cost, least risk over the energy investments time frame to ensure an affordable energy system for Minnesota's businesses, utilities, and citizens. To create economic opportunities for all Minnesotans by growing the state's clean energy industries, and for everyone to pay and earn their fair share, including families, small businesses, large industrials, co-ops, and utilities. We support the bill introduced by the Clean Energy and Jobs Coalition and the bill supported by the Department of Commerce. We believe they move us closer to those principles while we're still evaluating this bill, and appreciate some of the changes that the chair has considered after its initial release. We continue to oppose efforts to reduce or eliminate Minnesota's science-based climate reduction standards and the carbon offset standard to create political gridlock, and also the proposal to create political gridlock around the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's Clean Power Plan state implementation plan. There's ample evidence these are reductions, that is in the power plan, that are necessary to stave off the worst impacts of climate change. Minnesota is witnessing the impacts of those climate change, and that has been documented. To replace these clear science-based goals with the phrase "in an affordable manner" creates confusion on what metrics we are trying to achieve. As a state, it threatens our progress to reduce greenhouse gas pollution.
We deleted that, don't we?
We oppose counting existing, excuse me, I'm getting my updated testimony as I talk, Mr. Chairman, I'll be honest. So we're taking out some of the complaints. That's a good thing. We oppose eliminating, sunsetting the Conservation Improvement Program, but are willing to participate in conservation around a Conservation Improvement Program 2.0, and including all voices in that discussion as we go along in a stakeholder process that should be transparent and not limited as proposed. The CIP program has saved consumers money and avoided new construction of power plants, which have been an important hedge for rate increases related to updating our electrical system and increasing costs associated with fossil fuel generation. We oppose the changes to the Minnesota solar policy related to the weakening of the 1.5 standard. You've heard plenty of discussion about that. There's no need to repeat it. I think it's clear that those who are building that new industry have some real concerns about that. We oppose the repeal of the Minnesota nuclear moratorium. Nuclear energy is more expensive, and no one that we're aware of is interested in building a nuclear plant. And we have other avenues of increasing renewable energy without resorting to nuclear power. We support continuing to look at opportunities to improve net metering, but the proposed changes in this bill we believe are not fair to customers. Again, you've had discussion about that issue, and I'm not going to belabor that. We have concerns of the reallocation of Xcel Energy's Renewable Development Fund away from the research grants to incentive programs, especially when applied statewide instead of to Xcel customers who contribute to the fund, and when used for non-renewable purposes, because that goes against the intent of the fund when established. We agree some siting and permitting reform is needed, and have issued a report to that effect on our solar permit findings from local government interviews. We support the Department of Commerce recommendations, which were vetted by stockholders or stakeholders, including local governments. We did
For
not
the record, they were vetted by stockholders as well.
I understand that. And as I said that, I thought, just go on with stakeholders. We did not participate in the stakeholder process. We have concerns with the potentially overly burdensome siting outlined in the bill. Mr. Chairman and members, we can go one way or the other. We can go forward or we can go backward. I've heard some concerns expressed that this bill takes us backwards. I look forward to your further discussions and potential amendments to take some of the valuable recommendations you've heard tonight and before to make sure that the bill that comes out of this committee moves us forward to a carbon-free energy system. Thank you for your attention, and I would answer questions, but like everyone else, I'll wait for another time.
Thank you, Mr. Ottinger, and thank you for pointing out that the committee did post a draft version of this bill before the recess. Given the highly technical nature of the energy statutes, I thought that was the right thing to do, and I hope it's something that future legislators of both parties with jurisdiction over this matter do, that giving people a week to digest that sort of complex material is helpful. So thank you, Mr. Ottinger.
Well, we applaud you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Mahoney?
Mr. Chair, having spent much of the night with one ear listening to the testimony and one eye reading through your bill, I wish you would have done that with the jobs bill.
If it was done, I would have, Representative Mahoney. I don't believe I have any other. Right, come on up, sir. Did you? Are the pages now drafting testifiers? Is that what's going on here? Poor guy looks like he's in a hostage video. He's like, sir, welcome to the committee. Please state your name. And again, if there are any other public testifiers, just please get a hold of the committee pages. Just raise your hand maybe so I have a reference of how many people are left. So this will be our final testifier of the night then. And again, just for people's, for future testimony, we'll be open for public testimony tomorrow from 10:15 to about 11:50, and then also on Friday we'll also take public testimony. So welcome to the committee, sir. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Chair. Name is Lee Samuelson. I work with Community Power MN, have been organizing events to educate the community on the basics of our energy utility economics, and building a base of people who can be active and involved in Minneapolis Clean Energy Partnership programs that make energy efficiency and distributed generation programs more accessible and relevant to the groups who need them the most. And I recall the chair speaking in good humor and optimism that the policy objectives looked for are energy sources that are cleaner and more affordable. But what this omnibus bill does, as I see it, is make clean energy less affordable. It's the weakening of the solar incentives, value of solar net metering programs that Mr. Hinkle, among others, described earlier, in a way so that customers who have invested in their own renewables can't be adequately compensated for the electricity they provide to the grid, which benefits all customers. It kind of turns the clean energy revolution into an exclusive party that only the established wealth is invited to. What we want is for clean energy to be seen as a pathway out of energy poverty and where the low income have access to the jobs it creates, and tell a new story of economic equity and prosperity for all. The easier that financial policies make it for a greater number of residents to participate in solar energy, the greater our ability is to fend off these divide and conquer tactics you hear, and a more powerful tool we can have for a broader democratization of energy. And such examples of helpful financial tools are that go with community solar gardens, or on-bill repayment, pay-as-you-go, and revolving loan funds. There's quite a few solutions here. I do want to add there's a Louisiana study that found that solar roofs resulted in a cost shift of $2 million for energy users who do not own solar panels, has been debunked is basically paid off and for by fossil fuel interest. And meanwhile, there are numerous recent reports commissioned by regulators in Mississippi, Nevada, Maine, as well as the state consumer advocate in Vermont, have confirmed that whatever cost the distributed or net metered solar causes are drastically outweighed by the benefits. And so the renewable energy sector of our economy is growing at a rate of about 10 times the rest of the economy. And this is more of an issue of idealism for me. It's also about survival and security for the long-term future. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Once again, are there any other members of the public who wish to testify in favor or voice concerns with the bill? Okay, we'll continue public testimony tomorrow. Just 3 comments from the chair, and then we'll adjourn the committee for the night. Number 1 is with regards to SIP and the comments that the chair has heard. There's a pretty huge power vacuum in SIP right now. It might be a good time for someone to convene a stakeholder process and come forward with some ideas to make SIP better. Just a suggestion if somebody out there wants to do it. We can't do it as legislators. We need people who are going to convene this group and meet. So if someone wants to fill that power vacuum, now might be a good time to do it. Second of all, with regards to net metering, I'm happy to meet with people on that, but what people are saying the bill does is not what the language in the bill does, but I'm happy to revise that. If I've either written this language wrong or if people are misreading it, I'm happy to address those concerns. And third and finally, it's my understanding as this bill is written that it results in carbon dioxide reductions based on current law when you factor in the reduction of all the energy policies. And if I'm wrong on that, I'm happy to stand corrected, but seeing as how I wrote the bill, I'm pretty sure I'm right. So you might want to take a look at that for those who are concerned about CO2. And the final point is what's it? Oh, okay, I was just going to say the chair is going to Burger Mo's with interested parties. If you want to go down for a beer and have something to eat, want to lobby members of the committee, that's where we'll be tonight. So Representative Johnson. Representative, that's Burger Mo's on West 7th Street in St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't mean to interrupt your closing comments, but I did raise my hand earlier. So, but anyway.
Apologies, Representative Johnson. I didn't
No,
say it. Representative Johnson.
I just wanted to clarify the broadband stuff as I had a chance to look at the bill while people were testifying, just so I understand it before tomorrow. 3 things. One is it looks like there's a $2 million grant for an Annandale-type city. The McDonald bill is in. I think that's correct, and it's paid through to the Minnesota Investment Fund. I looked it up. Does that seem correct to you?
Yeah, Representative Johnson, I don't know if you want me to answer these one at a time, but I guess I will. There are 2 allocations from the Minnesota Investment Fund. One is for Representative Murphy in the city of Duluth for Sirius that we heard yesterday. The second one is for the Annandale infrastructure issue.
Right, okay.
And I'm happy to talk with you about the Annandale situation. There's some more context I can give you on that. But
There's,
Representative Johnson.
Very good. And there's 0 money for the border-to-border broadband grant program allocated. I mean, that's clear. And then the one thing I don't understand, but maybe you can tell me tomorrow.
Vogel? Bob? Can you move so I can say thanks?
Moving the office of broadband from deed to commerce. Can you You want to explain that tomorrow? I don't have to do it right now.
We're not moving it from deed to commerce.
Okay, it's staying in deed?
No, it's not. I'm eliminating the office.
Oh, you're eliminating, I thought there was still money there.
Nope.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? If not, we'll see everybody at Burger Mo's. We're adjourned.